Welcome, everybody. We're going to start in a few minutes. Meanwhile, I can already ask you to join us at slido.com/disinfo, the service we will use for all Q&A, comments, question today. And if you could already tell us where you're joining from, and we're going to start in just a few minutes. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, good morning if you're on the other side of the pond. What a great Finnish community we have today to talk about Doppelganger. Germany is back. So we have 32 participants today. Only 14 people have said just a few words about who they are and who they come from. I'm going to start the next question now. So can you just help us to understand where you do come from? So my name is Alexandre Alaphilippe. I'm very happy to welcome you today in our EU DisinfoLab webinars. Our EU DisinfoLab webinars are a series of online meetings that are designed for the counter disinformation community to meet, to listen to a speaker, for a case study, for any kind of responses to disinformation. We hold this webinar almost every week now, and we are planning to have these regular sessions being at the same time around Tuesday or Thursdays around 2:30 p.m. Central European time. So today we have a fantastic guest, and we're going to talk about something which is very close to our heart at EU DisinfoLab, is the Doppelganger. The webinar today is titled Doppelganger Doubles Down. Our guest today is Brian Liston. Brian Liston works at, and welcome, Brian. You can jump on stage. Thank you. You are a senior threat intelligence analyst at Recorded Future. For more than 4 years, you have specialized in researching Russian malign influence operations, propaganda, and disinformation. And your other interests include coding open source intelligence investigations, which is very close to the first interest that you have, but also Eastern European politics and international election security. So the webinar of today is really to look and to have a comprehensive overview of new research from Recorded Future that was published just before Christmas, if I remember well, into the evolution of the Russia-linked malign influence network called Doppelganger, including insights into the sophisticated tactics and internet behavior aimed at sowing discord in social media across international audiences. But today we're also going to talk a bit about the infrastructure, about what's happening beyond social media, and how this operation have been able to build a very dense and incoherent network of obfuscation, of trying to hide how the operation was being conducted and the different layers of deception that have been implemented to this. So we're going to listen to you for 30 minutes, Brian, and then we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A. As I mentioned, the Q&A will happen through Slido, so don't disconnect your phone or your laptop from Slido, slido.com. The code is disinfo. We have 45 people in this meeting today. I'm putting you as a co-host, Brian, so you should now able to share your screen, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And thank you. Good morning, everybody, for being with us. Is everyone to see the presentation okay?
Yeah, seems good.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, for everybody in attendance. As my introduction was, my name is Brian Liston, and I am a senior intelligence analyst with Recorded Futures Instant Group research team. We manage all of our research and finished intelligence products. Again, I'm coming up on about 5 years at Recorded Future, and for 4 of those 5 years, my primary focus has been on Russian malign influence operations, particularly around international election cycles, including in particular here in the US and Europe. And then, of course, supporting our partners in Ukraine. About 6 months ago, our team began tracking the Doppelganger campaign, a prominent campaign impersonating Western media organizations with pro-Russian content, targeting a number of European countries, including Germany, France, Ukraine, and here in the US. Our research builds off of prior findings, which came through initially the EU DisinfoLab, Meta, the French government, and then of course it would be very appropriate to give a shout out to the research team at the Bot Blocker Anybot for Navalny project. Those folks have done an excellent job with kind of bringing Doppelganger to light for public media consumption, and public awareness of that campaign, which we have been able to build that research off of. So just going into the agenda for today, we're going to just like do a quick recap of Doppelganger so far for those that might be trying to get caught up or not entirely aware of the campaign. And then we will jump into Recorded Futures investigation and some of our key findings. Afterward, we'll walk through more specifically Doppelganger's advanced obfuscation techniques across social media platforms, network of inauthentic domains, and influence information portals. Finally, we'll also touch on where Recorded Future is now in its continuing research of Doppelganger, and then looking ahead in the future of the campaign, particularly through evidence of AI use or generative AI use. So, though I'm sure many folks here are familiar with Doppelganger, based either through initiatives through EU DisinfoLab, media reporting, a number of media reports lately, just to briefly summarize what the network is, Recorded Future, we define the campaign as a persistent malign influence operation network, impersonating international news and media outlets with fake websites and original inauthentic news portals. As mentioned, we began tracking Doppelganger about 6 months ago in mid to late October 2023, though the campaign's roots date back to at least May 2022. Doppelganger, again, it's best known for its impersonation of Western media sources through spoofed domains, and then using impersonated websites to inject pro-Kremlin influence content. Visually to a reader or a non-keen eye, the authentic website and the impersonated website will often look identical. Many will feature updated publication links, hyperlinks, and redirects from the clone site will work, and you'll be able to redirect appropriately to the actual website, giving the impression that a viewer is on the actual website. The difference, however, is of course the domain in which they're at the page that they're looking at. The actors will slightly change, the URL by adding a hyphen, maybe changing the country code. So instead of it being a .com, it might be a .tld or a .foo, or maybe a .media, as we found in our research. Doppelganger includes targeting primarily 4 target languages: French, German, US, and English and Ukrainian audiences. However, there is reports of Doppelganger extending beyond several countries in Europe, and there has also been evidence of Doppelganger content written in Hebrew. The two Russian companies attributed to the operation, Struktura National Technologies and Social Design Agency, have several Russian government contracts. And per recent reporting from the Washington Post, they have worked closely with senior Kremlin officials on Doppelganger content and narratives. Also, the U.S. Department of State has linked both of these companies to malign influence operations in Latin America through the one website called, I believe it's Recently Reliable News or Reliable Recent News. that's linked to the two companies. So in December 2023, we published our report titled Obfuscation AI Content in the Russian Influence Network Doppelganger Singles of Evolving Tactics. Our investigation started as a initial look into some social media accounts we had found engaging in some spam-like behavior, flooding platforms with multi-stage redirect links that when they ultimately resolved, we found that they impersonated three prominent Ukrainian outlets. How we actually identified the initial thread was by chance, looking at targeted keywords for potential malign influence narratives to inject themselves. After initially identifying some of the domains that they used to impersonate the outlets were associated with Doppelganger, we looked into that campaign further, and then identified multiple clusters of activity on a fairly consistent cadence several times throughout a week, several weeks over a course of about a month and a half investigation. On attributing this to Doppelganger, our research into the Ukrainian clusters, we found at first about 100 accounts promoting links that redirected to domains previously that was attributed to Doppelganger, and then a new domain, rbk.media, that was impersonating RBC Ukraine, which is a prominent Ukrainian news publication. We were also aware at the same time of similar news coverage from outlets such as France 24, The Times, The Insider, on malign influence accounts associated with the Doppelganger network that had been engaging in similar tactics at the time. Further, some of the accounts, interestingly, were adopting a multilingual personality, posting content maybe one day in Ukrainian and then another day, separate day, posting something in English, or posting Doppelganger content in German another day, or maybe a combination of those. And so from there, we were able to kind of grow that network out. And just given the lack of limitations on social media with like restricting the content at a time, it was fairly easy to identify accounts in this network as being maybe associated with Doppelganger. At the time of our publication, we located about 800 of these and got engaging in automated, coordinated, and authentic behavior to promote Doppelganger content. Some of them would be reusing profile photos sourced from NFT artwork. Others might be using photos of animals or cartoons. And then nearly all of them shared a very similar naming convention, which would be first name followed by maybe a letter or two, then a series of 5 or 6 digits to fill out the rest of their handle. And then the majority of the accounts tend to use common Western names in their handles, even whenever the name might not match the description of the person that they were trying to impersonate, like a Jeff, for example, maybe in their social media handle, but in the reality, their actual name of the account was Donald or maybe Donna or something like that. And then all the accounts that we had looked at were registered in October 2023. During this investigation, when we were building that network out, we identified 6 additional domains, which has since grown to about 50, likely connected to Doppelganger infrastructure, producing and disseminating malign content as original news and opinion pieces. These networks, these inauthentic news organizations, the way we're assessing this right now, are they're trying to establish a sense of credibility to shape the opinions of the target audiences. We've seen this primarily with French and German audiences. We've also seen a lot of this in original content targeting French audiences. Some of those domains linking the original news outlets or some of the different not impersonated content was linked in some meta reporting earlier in the year. Those domains were listed as appendix items, but they weren't really detailed beyond the appendix. And so this further hardened our attribution that this was in fact Doppelganger. Within Doppelganger content targeting Ukrainian audiences, that generally falls in a line with other Russian-linked malign influence operations, which usually fall narrative-wise into one of several tracks. These include demoralizing morale, reducing public support for the war, seeding doubt on the capabilities or the effectiveness of the Ukrainian military, challenge Ukrainian military leadership, and of course, attempt to sow discontent within Ukraine's internal political stability, particularly with regards to the government and the military, and sowing tension among Ukrainian audiences with regards to international allies. If we pivot to Western audiences in our research, we were looking at not only impersonated websites impersonating what prominent Western media figures, but we were also looking at specific narratives promoted through original inauthentic news websites stood up in support of the operation that I just alluded to a couple slides back. Original news portals would focus on, here in the States, U.S. politics, social issues, U.S. military and foreign policy matters. Broadly, in Europe, this would also include immigration policy, domestic decline due to migration, sowing doubt with regards to continued support to Ukraine. In Europe, some of these narratives targeting French and German audiences sought to erode trust in elected leadership, fuel nationalist sentiment, undermine European economic and security agreements, and then, of course, greatly aim to shift opinions towards reducing support to Ukraine. The initial 800 accounts that we had found as part of this research were injecting doppelganger content into social media through promoted links via spammy reply tactics. Accounts would lean on popular social media accounts in each of the target languages, as well as target location-specific trending topics and keywords. Periodically, these accounts would post other forms of content. This includes memes, audio or video content in support of those broader overarching narrative goals. Since the release of our report and another coverage around Doppelganger, the accounts have pivoted to a degree where you're seeing a core network of accounts, these inauthentic single-use accounts, post Doppelganger content, and then a network of automated accounts will then engage in reply spam, flooding comment replies, again, those trending keywords or other topics. And then it's worth noting that most of the accounts that we had tracked as part of our initial investigation in December had been restricted or suspended within a few weeks of being active. So moving into what this looks like from an infrastructure and obfuscation perspective, Doppelganger contains a comprehensive multi-stage obfuscation network with some tracking techniques that in our research was consistent with other folks' research to date. We found multiple links of the Kitaro traffic distribution system, which is a, if you're not aware, an analytics platform used to track advertising campaigns. This was previously identified in Doppelganger research, and we were able to reaffirm that. Sometimes these would the domains have since shifted from our initial research point to the to current day with Kitaro, but we still can see that consistently. Each instance of this campaign would rely on two stages of link obfuscation, which were likely intended to evade detection or mask the final destination of a website when somebody on social media would click on a link from a spammy post. The first stage websites, they're used to set the metadata for social media posts and begin the redirecting process for a user. And these were usually hosted on bulletproof hosting providers based in Russia, such as bulletproof hosting providers either linked to Sprint Host or Shelter LLC, which are Russian providers. The second stage of those websites in this chain were hosted on a single IP address owned by BL Networks, which is a a faceless hosting provider based in the UK with links to BitLaunch. It's which is a self-proclaimed Bitcoin VPS cloud provider. We have since seen a very slight shift in the IP address usage of that domain, of that second stage IP address to a different number than we saw in our initial research. But we do speculate that due to the unrelated nature of these domains, because they usually appear innocuous and benign compared to the actual content that they promote, some of these domains were likely compromised at one point and repurposed for Doppelganger. But that will probably warrant some additional investigation. I had mentioned, some of these have moved over into Russian-based IP addresses, IP spaces that are bulletproof hosting providers. Usually this is used maybe for info-stealer campaigns or malign activity. And there were a number of different companies that we saw associated with that. EasyHost, another Russian hosting provider, Aza International or Aza Group. I mentioned Sprint Host. These were all different hosting providers where we were seeing the first stage domains. Updated hosting as of 2024. This takes place through IP addresses hosted through Global Internet Solutions and LLC, which has servers across Europe, including Poland, Austria, Estonia, and the Netherlands. We've also seen periodic hosting via TNS Security, which is another Russia hosting provider. Or as you'll see as their name in Whois records, it's referred to as, quote, Evil Empire. They have a organization with their organization has a virtual office address in London, but there's no indication that they actually have any operations from that address. So in the next couple of slides, I just want to walk through a very recent example of a doppelganger attributed social media post, and then take that beginning to end and walk you through what this process looks like for masking that final destination, evading detection. Should a end user, somebody who sees a post like this, clicks on the link and then they run through this chain. For just a quick background, on February 14, we located a doppelganger instance targeting Ukrainian audiences with content critical of the government. Translated post reads, "When will the government understand that the will of the people cannot be ignored?" Then the account will then provide a link, which again appears to be entirely unrelated to the content itself. This is what we refer to as that stage one, or that first stage redirect website. When you click that link, you'll begin going through a redirecting process that maybe only takes, honestly, 2 to 3 seconds in total. Very briefly, while the first stage website undergoes its processing, researchers can examine the page's HTML through the browser inspection tab, which will reveal more about the domain's infrastructure and its behavior. In this example, examining the first stage website's HTML, you can note that the article and the social media post thumbnail images are hosted via telegraph.ph. This also prompts a refresh to a second stage website. In this specific example, this second stage domain was americantectona.com. Again, another benign domain, but it was only really used to mask the final destination of that article. Again, quite briefly, you'll be presented with perhaps a blank page, depending on your location, but in many instances, you'll get a splash page very similar to this one here on the presentation, containing entirely irrelevant filler content or maybe placeholder text, such as this random gibberish about melons renting sheep or some other nonsense. Visually, again, it looks entirely benign, but there are additional processes in the background, as signified again by that website's code. And this only really takes, again, only a few seconds from beginning to end. These second stage websites utilize a JavaScript a set of code encoded by base 64 to retrieve and load Doppelganger content through a Kitaro instance that between October 2023 and December 2023 was hosted at ggspace.space. This has since changed from the publication of our report to a new domain, sdgqaef.site. Whether or not that the timing is coincidental with the publication of our report, or if this is a deliberate infrastructure change, we're not entirely sure. But for timing wise, there is some additional questions that we're asking with that. The screenshot here, it shows what that encoded base64 JavaScript will look like in the inspect page. But if we take the highlighted content and send it through a decoder, this will be the decoded payload that we retrieve. This payload includes configuration information, retrieves configuration information from the visitor's browser's local stage storage object, and then the JavaScript will craft a new request containing tracking information to redirect the user to the final Doppelganger domain. This also includes, as I have highlighted here, a campaign ID, which remains fairly consistent across Doppelganger to present day, using a fairly simple country underscore date dash month underscore target format, which remains relatively unchanged. So in this example, we have, okay, the target country is Ukraine underscore 14-02, that's February 14th. And then the target is RBK underscore -2, which is an article for RBC Ukraine impersonated through rbk.media. And then after that process goes through, this will be the final resolution of the domain for anyone in the target audience that clicks that link. So the article will read European allies in panic, and it talks about, it tries to create a sense of uncertainty and fear, I think, among Ukrainian audiences with regards to whether or not its Western partners will continue to support Ukraine militarily, providing aid and other resources. It goes into other narratives suggesting that the U.S. will entirely pull back, calling that President Biden is obviously will not be reelected for a second term, as it states, and just tries to seed that doubt. So what we'll see is dozens, hundreds, thousands of these social media accounts posting these links. To give a sense of the website scale, this following graph provides a sampling of websites used to promote Doppelganger. There are two networks that we're looking at here, one from October to December 2023 and one from January to February 2024. These are changes in the Kitaro hosted instance, like that GG space, to the SDG-QAEF instance. In the outer fringes of the network, these clusters of darker blue dots, those are those first stage domains. Those are domains that are used in the initial obfuscation process on social media. So attached to each one of those it could be hundreds, potentially even thousands of social media accounts that are using those URLs when engaging in this reply-like spam. The second stage domains, represented in that lighter blue, are what include the encoded JavaScript to load content from GG Space or the other Kitaro hosted site. And then in the center of each graph is that instance used for loading and pushing content to the network, and which is also used to measure how effective the campaign is. Again, we've seen that transition from GG Space to SDG-QAEF since the publication of our report, and we've seen that increased use of that domain since publication, and the intensity of the use of that versus GG Space. So in practice, what does this look like to the end user? Well, Doppelganger is usually most commonly associated with impersonating authentic media outlets with spoof domains that really reveal themselves in the end of the process. Each of the screenshots provided here are of actual Doppelganger articles targeting each of the 4 primary target audiences in just the last 4 months. Since mid 2023, and I caveat this as mid 2023 with domain registration details, a trend shift in Doppelganger is the use of an increasing use of custom and authentic websites acting as news portals. So if we flip to this slide, I mentioned a little earlier, we're tracking more than 50 inauthentic news portals as part of this Doppelganger network. Many of them are available to access just by visiting the domain. You don't, and unlike other Doppelganger campaigns, you don't need, or impersonating Western media publications, you don't need the actual URL to get to that website. You can visit them. You can visit all of these rather. Many of them share a very similar templated WordPress construction. They also tend to be incomplete or have construction errors, such as placeholder text or broken external links to social media. In one such example, one of the websites we were tracking for election coverage, and I'll actually talk about this one here in just a moment, a little bit more. Election Watch contains text that instead of being in English was in German, suggesting some degree of recycling across these websites. So building off of our investigation, we've since pivoted to understanding Doppelganger more, working on narratives, techniques, and some of the specific tactics that the threat actors are using in this campaign, including evolving novel attempts at conducting influence through old capabilities, social media promotion with memes, but then also leaning into generative AI audio, attempted audience building, and other generative AI enabled, likely generative AI enabled text content. We are still working to track some of the social media visibility associated with that. However, platforms have heavily restricted the account's organic reach by categorizing the accounts as spam or hiding their replies, or shadow banning for the accounts so that they cannot be searched, and that limits their visibility. It limits researchers' visibility into promoted first stage domains. So some of the specific evolution points of Doppelganger network on social media activity that we've been able to attribute independently and through media reporting or other researcher contributions include recently a moderately large campaign of multilingual fake celebrity quoting, typically with content critical of Ukraine. In that vein, we've also seen included celebrity interview clips that are, let's say they're actually originally in English, but they'll be voiced over in a different language with a fake translation of what the celebrity is saying, again, with that same anti-Ukraine slant. We'll continue to see network leverage, reply bot spam behavior, which again seems to be a focus on trending keywords, topics. These keywords may pertain to a target country's socio-political issues, or alternatively may be unrelated to the content the network wants to promote, such as sports or entertainment events. On visibility, just one thing I wanted to touch on is automated accounts will quote a core set of accounts that share this initial Doppelganger content when they're engaging in reply spam to social media users. So we will see a disproportionate amount of engagement on these core posts. Thousands of quoted shares in social media platforms. Comparing this with somebody saying they favorite a post or they reply to the post, it's highly disproportionate. You're talking like 1 to 2 versus 1.4 thousand accounts or whatever. Visibility beyond the network, again, it tends to be pretty limited, just generally being attributed to their spammy tactics and being flagged as spam or suspicious platforms, limiting visibility of the posts and so on. There are some isolated instances of what we're aware of some Doppelganger content reaching notable levels of reach, but we tend to categorize those as more of the sophisticated, more of an exception than a rule. For sophisticated level of social media amplification coupled with advanced techniques and lean-ins into AI, we think that this demonstrates a technically capable, proficient threat actor. This is a threat actor that understands the social media environment, and they have the infrastructure necessary to create and manage a significant network of inauthentic accounts. Though indirectly, these indicators do tend to align back to the two Russian companies that have been attributed to Doppelganger previously. Just to wrap up, a couple more slides on this. One discussion point we included in our initial research was evidence of likely generative AI to produce article content on a unknown number of inauthentic news portals. When we were investigating the website Election Watch, we noticed that the website lacked a bit of an editorial personality. It had a style of writing that would not imply a specific position or bias. Articles were relatively bland. You'd see essay-style multi-paragraph pieces that reflected on maybe Western news publications or seemed to be summarizations of Western news content. And then we also noticed frequent use of transitional phrases in English that were atypical of a serious news publication, things like in conclusion or furthermore or out or however. It was the combination of these factors that we had assessed that Doppelganger admins were likely at least partially using generative AI programming to produce news content, possibly asking a text program to summarize a news piece or write an article based on specific details. Recently reported future analysis of all of the Doppelganger websites we've been tracking for several months. There is additional evidence of AI-generated activity across English, French, and German articles. As you can see in this record feature timeline view, this is references to specific transition words used in each of those websites. Some of the articles do give the appearance of being edited by a human, including hyperlinks or maybe other editorial changes, while other times, as we can see in some of these examples, they include those unusual transitional phrases across those languages, which are consistent with something like a GPT 3.5 program that tends to lean on transitional phrases to connect thoughts together, such as in conclusion or in short or in summary. So that's also something we're continuing to look at. But to just wrap up the presentation, our assessment going into 2024 is that Doppelganger is very likely to persist as a malign influence operation in 2024, targeting pivotal international elections, current events, and wedge issues that matter most to target audiences. So I mentioned at the beginning those four primary target audiences: French, German, Ukrainian, and English language audiences. We expect to see a continuation of Doppelganger content attempting to build audiences and credibility for some of those inauthentic news portals, and also continuing to engage in a lot of the reply spam that we have seen on social media. So with that, thank you all for having me. I'm more than happy to take some questions, and it was an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I have some of my contact info down at the bottom. I absolutely love to nerd out on Doppelganger, as Alex knows. So yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for this very extensive presentation, including the bonus on the likely use of AI into the content, which was not in your original study. And thank you for sharing this insight for the community. I'm going to share my screen again because we are now have 20 minutes for questions and Q&A, and you can do this by whether scanning the QR code or by joining slido.com/disinfo. And maybe meanwhile we have Q&A coming. We have 47 participants in the room. We already have a question. So perfect, I don't have to ask one. How much of the operation could be automated through clever programming? How much time, effort, and personnel were actually needed for during the operation?
Yeah, so to answer your question number one, I would say through I think enough time, effort, and resources, you could nearly automate the entire process beginning to end. You could mirror or mask the websites through sophisticated programming. You could create articles at scale through using a generative AI text program, and of course, you'd be able to promote social media content at scale using a wide network of bots. Without getting in too much into the details, internally we've been able to kind of confirmed that's a possibility that exists through some further analysis. But I think, you know, if you have a company like Structura or social design agency that have seemingly infinite resources to conduct a campaign, it's certainly within the realm of possibility.
Thank you, Brian. Did you notice overlaps? I'm not going to take Marcus' question now. I want to keep it to the end because I was looking at it at the same time. So Marcus, don't worry, we'll come back to you. So do you notice overlaps between Doppelganger and Portal Combat? Portal Combat, just like for people that haven't been following all the amount of studies that are being published in this field in the past 3 weeks, which gives a bit of seasick to everybody to have to read everything. So basically, Portal Combat is another network that has been mapped by Vigilium, the French counter digital interference public authority, which is focusing at other type of Russian actors that have been maintaining online portals to sow disinformation in the French context, and not only.
Yeah, so to answer this question, we have seen an overlap recently. This was something I recently chatted with some of the Antibody for Vivaldi folks, and internally we analyzed Portal Combat. We were looking at some of the domains that had been used to promote that, especially some of the Pravda links. Some of the accounts, quite frankly, they have promoted content from Portal Combat through some of those Doppelganger social media accounts. In fact, one of the instances in which we saw that was articles and interviews that when you go through the Portal Combat links are based on interviews from Maria Tirada of the Foundation of Battle and Justice, which is, interestingly enough, a formerly financed organization from Yevgeny Prigozhin, who, of course, is associated with Wagner and the IRA. Of course, he handed that over to Tirada several years ago at this point. But it was interesting to see that content from Pravda.ru. I can't remember what the exact URL is. But Doppelganger social media accounts were, in fact, sharing links back to that content. And then outside of the 4 core languages, do I see any other activities in other languages, smaller scale? On social media, it tends to be isolated to the 4 primary languages. I did mention that we have seen instances of content from in Hebrew from an outlet dubbed Walla. But that tends to be fairly isolated to just the website itself and not so much in social media. Yeah, I think Alex, if I remember correctly, I think some of your research has found upwards of 7 different languages or 7 target countries or something of that nature. But we've seen kind of more of an isolated activity set.
Yeah, the operation had some kind of use of Italian language at the beginning with a fake answer, use of being in Lithuania, if I remember well. So with Delphi impersonation. So we did see some extra countries targeted at some point, but if we look overall in the majority, I think majority of the content was the 4 languages that you describe, Brian, like French, English, German, not in the sense of proportion, but like German, French, English, and Ukrainian. Maybe just to add up to the initial question about Portal Combat, you mentioned that there was a shift, I think, around during 2023 of not only promoting like this kind of the real doppelganger, but basically the impersonation of media brands. Then we started to also have this kind of inauthentic media outlets being built. But we've also seen the same infrastructure being able to produce whether other assets from other information operations, such as content from the InfoRos network at some point. But we've also seen legitimate articles from legitimate websites that have been pushed by this network, specifically in France. So there is at some point some kind of effort to actually curate content, which is also favorable, I would say, by design to what the operation wants to push as a narrative, and to also like take, I would say, leverage of genuine content being brought and being written by local sources to be able to target this.
Absolutely. And to add on to that, there have been a few instances of doppelganger social media accounts, again, as we've seen in our research, promoting legitimate, again, websites through various European media portals or whatever, interview clips or webinar clips, anything that I think is indirectly or maybe even directly supportive of the narratives that they want to incrementally introduce or reaffirm among those audiences. We've seen some of that promotion. So we have those two core sets of impersonating Western media, and then you have the original authentic portals, and of course, as we're saying here, with periodic amplification of legitimate content that is in support of those broader strategic goals.
Okay. Have you seen instances of doppelganger or similar networks outside of the countries highlighted on the map? In Bulgaria, we have the so-called mushroom websites. If the person can explain what are the mushroom websites, that would be fantastic, because I don't know about it.
What I can say for just recorded futures research, it's been fairly restricted just in those target countries. But what seems to be one of the cases with doppelganger, when you're loading that multi-stage content, there seems to be some level of geofencing associated with those domains, where if you are in Europe, you're more likely than not able to visit some of those doppelganger pages if they're original news portals, or if they're impersonated articles of prominent publications. So I think I would have to do more research on this, but I think if somebody, for example, in Bulgaria was able to click on one of those doppelganger links, they probably would be able to resolve to that final one to view that content, whereas somebody outside of a target region may or may not be able to view that. It seems that they do have a little bit of a handle on the amount of visibility that they have onto those domains. After a certain number of days, those domains, they might shut those down. And so you can't go back and reaccess the articles after a certain period of time. And again, there's been some evidence recently of some geofencing associated with that too. But to indirectly answer your question, that there might be instances of that activity appearing elsewhere, but I think we'd probably have to do some more research on that.
Yeah, I have what appears, before we go to Marcus, I want to keep the Marcus question to the end because it's also part of the evolution. But like Brian, I think why having two stages of redirection? Why not only one? Why do you put two, and then why don't you put 3 or 4 or 10?
That is an interesting question. I think we're still trying to get the answer to. In terms of multiple stages, I think loading content at different points is probably something that's important. Again, the process only takes 2 to 3 seconds from beginning to end to get there. So if you're clicking on a link and then you go and look at something else and you turn back and okay, there's the page loaded, you don't really see anything. I think it's to give the posts a little bit of credibility. You have the thumbnail images that are hosted on a different place, so that loads in, and then you of course have the links. Some social media platforms, as I'm sure we've all known, have kind of removed the ability to see some of the URLs in the posts themselves, which may cause some confusion as to whether or not, if I'm clicking on something that says it's the New York Times, is it actually the New York Times? So with those changes in how social media may present a certain URL or a hyperlink, I think there's some kind of logic that goes into that. And then of course, just being able to kind of load that content in stages. But whether or not why would they do something in 1 versus 3 or 4 or 10, I I think is probably something that they would have to answer for us. I'm not entirely sure.
Thank you. So I have more information about the mushroom. So the mushroom websites are imposter online media websites that pop up to amplify disinformation, propaganda, and fake news. A lot of them are spawned from a website that pay people to share them on social media. These websites don't rank high on Google, but they are widely shared on Facebook and flood the online media space with these narratives. There's a company called Sensica that is monitoring and actually came with the term of mushroom website. Yeah, I think we could say that part of this strategy is, yeah, I think to have been to set up this kind of new online media, independent media brands, which has absolutely no information about who's the editor or who's managing that content, and to be able to push this and to have this kind of apparatus of a very reliable or at least legitimate website on this, and that's definitely one of the new avenues the thing is going. There's so considering RRN, reliable recent news, so which has been tied by Visionum as part of the overall Doppelganger network, whose social media profiles have been taken down due to the initial exposure by French government. What are your considerations regarding the non-enforcement of takedowns by EU institutions and Twitter X to the now new account they have been using? To be precise, Marcus, I'm not sure. For context, they used to have the rrn.world and now have rrn.media and a paid Twitter X verified account. So I think this one is more on enforcement of policies of Twitter X, because EU institutions, I don't think can actually do takedown of or enforcement. So it's all about platforms and enforcement rules.
Yeah, I think navigating the content moderation of any platform is probably a challenging one, especially from an armchair observer or a researcher like myself. I think anytime a platform goes through some sort of an overhaul in their content moderation policies, whether or not that's due to layoffs or if that's due to wholesale changes in how you're moderating content, whether you're leaning more into AI, or alternatively you are kind of pulling back on some of that content restriction through so-called free speech. It definitely opened up the question about like how I think legislative bodies can enforce this, especially whenever we have particularly malign behavior. In terms of RRN, I know that there's multiple of these original news portals, kind of one of the screenshots or sets of screenshots that I've shared with you, that have established social media presences. In other cases, some of the accounts that we had, or some of the portals that we had investigated for recorded futures research, such as My Pride or Election Watch, look to have tried to establish a social media presence on Instagram, according to our research, but that had been taken down probably through some of the proactive efforts through Meta and others. Though I can't really specifically comment too much on like any particular platform moderation policies. I think the lack of moderation kind of lends its way into, okay, can EU institutions kind of step in for something like that when there's a lot of evidence suggesting of a malign influence operation and little to mitigate it. That said, we have seen a lot of takedowns of these big networks of accounts that are promoting doppelganger content, shadow banning, restricting access to content, categorizing it as spam or limiting their visibility. So there is some degree of content moderation there, but when you get into specific accounts, I think there's some additional questions, especially about things that are paid or whatnot.
I think to broaden the question, I think there is a question of of knowing what kind of enforcement is being made on all platforms, because like we're mentioning X, but we're also mentioning that many research have been done by Reset, notably on the what we call the Beautiful network, the network of pages that were all using like synonym of word beautiful, and then there were like vagues of these inauthentic pages waiting to be activated. So we also see that there are some kind of assets ready to be used, and I think what we need to know is like what kind of enforcement platforms are taking, what's the level of this enforcement, how is it efficient, and how they are adapting their own, I would say, mechanism to this. And that's what hopefully the new Digital Services Act could do. And we will, of course, look into this. Maybe, Brian, a question. We still have 5 minutes left, so two last questions, and I'll keep the last one from Marcus because I promised. You said like it's possible to automate this, and I think you've mapped. There is like really a very strong architecture that has been put in place. Like, is it so you could automate it from A to Z, but is it costly to run such an operation?
I don't think it needs to be, because there's a low barrier of entry to a lot of tools and resources, especially with generative AI, to create compelling content with very minimal investment. And of course, if you have technically competent engineers or folks that are able to do a lot of coding and programming to produce these websites, and to some degree some quality assurance to being able to kind of filter out the things that identify something as a campaign, I don't think it's necessarily costly at all. It's beneficial, I think, if you're talking like two companies like Structura or Social Design Agency, to have a budget to go and create this content. But it isn't necessarily expensive to do so. But I'm sure there's probably benefits to having kind of increased resources that maybe an amateur would not be able to kind of go and procure versus a larger company with a number of folks responding. So the barrier entry again is quite low. Many of these, I think, tools that ones can use to produce this content is very cheap or free even. And of course, with some of the generative AI programs, there's many jailbroken versions of them to produce any kind of content with any sort of the guardrails that we have when you're using some of those tools. So it's definitely not an expensive endeavor, but I'm sure that there's a benefit to having some substantial budgeting for that campaign.
Okay, thank you, Brian, and it's linked to what Marcus sent, so I just wanted to share it with you. And it's basically that, yes, indeed, we had a very nice reply to this webinar from this kind of allegedly, I think that's New York Times or the Daily Telegraph, video about Body World exhibition creator offers 20 million for Alexei Navalny's body. We have seen the same kind of disinformation with the same narrative earlier in the campaign with another logo, which was about Ukrainian soldiers being showed, bodies being showed live into exhibition. So who knows, maybe in the people that register to this free webinar, we have people from Doppelganger campaign disguising as other people. Who knows?
Yeah, the one interesting thing about this, I've been looking at this kind of on the side. I've seen multiple versions of this post from a Cynthia Jackson account. It seems to be spamming this in the replies of many different sources. What this reminds me most of, I believe a few months ago, there was a campaign. I don't know if it was necessarily attributed to Doppelganger, but it was a very similar video clip with text impersonating the BBC. And I believe that the target of that was also Bellingcat. And there was some dispute about whether or not this was authentic initially, eventually it was found that this was in fact fake. But this seems to follow a very similar pattern that we've seen previously, especially too with some of the voiceovers of celebrities with some of the malign messages translated over them. So yeah, that looks pretty consistent with some of the doppelganger evolution.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's also linked to at some point to also sending all of these documents and all of these fake videos to fact checkers so they can spend time to investigate. And as you said, the time we need to spend to expose these campaigns, to investigate it is quite long sometimes. And on the other side, the cost of running it is quite low. So we're also part of an asymmetric fight on this. Thank you, Brian. Thanks a lot for this and for all the question. Before I'm closing this webinar, I just wanted to tell you that we have a few webinars coming in next week. Massive Russian influence operation on TikTok and beyond with Roman Osachuk, and we might have similar interesting findings to look at what we exposed today on Doppelganger. 14th of March, this will be done by my colleague Anna. 14th of March, I will do a webinar with Guillaume Kuster from Check First on monitoring algorithm in the presidential elections in Finland. And the 21st of March, my colleague Joe will welcome Julian Jausch to talk about actually the Digital Services Act and what is the role of coordinators. Julian from Stiftung Neue Verantwortung, who just changed name and is now named Interface. Thank you, everybody. You receive an email by tomorrow with all the links for these webinars. If you want to register, there will be also a replay available for this webinar. And when you receive the email to register for the next webinar, there is a small survey about what are the different topics that you would like us to touch in these webinars, and also a small evaluation. We would be very grateful if you can fill this up. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day ahead, and see you very soon in a EU DisinfoLab webinar. Take care. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, everybody.